Orcs live for the violence of war, for the ceaseless contest to prove themselves the strongest. Once an orc wog gets underway, there can be no hope until every last greenskin is slaughtered. Even then, they will soon return. Now, Warboss, gather your wog and make course to the nearest Imperial planet. There's some fighting to be had. Hello there, everyone. It's time to go over our brutish green friend, the Orks. And right off the bat, the Orks are the most numerous, perhaps, of all the factions in the game, for all their ships are incredibly cheap. Hell, their light cruisers are just about to break under 100 points for fielding them, and their frigates are under 30 points on almost all of them exclusively. They are incredibly cheap and they have a lot of firepower to bear. Although it goes without saying that they are slow, they are brutish, they are not going to get in close, which is where orcs are generally strongest at. They don't have the convenience of long range, even though their gun batteries can fire at extreme distances, especially in combination with lock-on. They're not going to do a lot of damage on their own, never mind the fact that orcs in general have really poor accuracy. So don't expect to win a lot of your matches utilizing long-range combat. They do, however, have a good amount of lances, but these are almost exclusively tied to any of the orc ships, battlecruiser or above, that have torpedoes equipped to them. As powerful and as amazing as the Mega Cannon can be for orcs, which arguably is probably up there for one of the most powerful weapons in the game, it does not penetrate armor and it suffers from even worse accuracy. So, where I say orcs are kind of want to get up your face, the Mega Cannon kind of emphasizes that fact. And when you realize that they don't have access to high energy turn, even all their torpedo launchers are going to be incredibly difficult to get value out of. Mind you, with, like I said, you're going to have so many ships that when you do start hitting with your torpedoes, they're going to hit hard. Imperial Navy would have to field 7 cruisers to get the most out that they can with the torpedoes, and that is almost exclusively forfeiting any frigates or scouting ability for a lot of the matchups they can come up against orcs. They can easily get 7, 8 ships without even trying and still have room for savages, for maybe a rock if it's warranted, or even just using some light cruisers to complement them. Orcs don't really care for that factor. You may not have the easiest time getting your torpedoes to stick, but you have so many of them that may not be a factor, especially when you consider that they also have access to boring torpedoes. So like with the Imperial Navy video I did before, you have 6 charges to utilize for long-range harassment and maybe to just chip down your opponent ahead of time if you decide to go with the torpedo route. But the simplest and probably the most effective type of style would be the mega cannons that a lot of these orc ships have to bear, and you can either augment them with either fighter bays or just straight up heavy cannons for the broadside for when you're feeling a little bit too aggressive. And just keep in mind, these heavy guns are almost comparable to the broadside weaponry of the Imperial Navy, so utilizing these using your broadside isn't a terrible thing, but in truth, you want to focus on your prow, you want to focus on ramming, you want to focus on your mega cannons, and torpedoes if you're equipped for them. For once you get your side exposed, you will be becoming more vulnerable to damage and retaliation, especially since your morale is really pitiful. A single fire assault, when you combine with the fact that you take double damage to the fire assault, is almost single-handedly going to take out half your morale, almost, depending on what kind of ship is taking the fire damage at the time, since it is health related. Despite the resilience, despite the power, the main issue you're going to have with this fleet is how disorganized you're going to be and the amount of mutinies you're going to get as a result. On top of the fact that due to your low mobility, kind of like how it was hinted at with Necrons, you need to have a really good understanding and good foresight of what your opponent's capable of and what they are likely to do, so that way you can prepare for them ahead of time. There's very little you could do in a reactionary measure to respond if torpedoes are coming your way, so you need to see that coming ahead of time if you want to effectively avoid or mitigate the damage. And even then, you have some unique options available to you in the rocks, which are very similar to the crew war spear I did with my town merchant fleet video. They only have access to one of each of the different classes, basically a cruiser version, a battleship version, and a light cruiser variant. These are great for soaking up damage since they are immune to critical hits, much like the crew war spear. They can very quickly turn 90 degrees to dodge a lot of torpedoes, plasma bombs, or anything that might get thrown their way. So These are very versatile either for just hanging on to a point that may be an awkward position if you feel a long game is going to be warranted, or just being in front of your ships, taking the hits, and burning up a lot of their valuable power in the form of torpedoes, secret missiles, or even their bombers in some sense. They are, however, a lot more pricier, especially in comparison to that, with the battleship itself being a whopping 450 points. You really do need to plan what you're going to use these rocks for it's very easy to get little value out of them. They are very effective at boarding as well, mind you. Unlike Necrons, Drukhari, and Space Marines, which have the same kind of troop efficiency as Orks, they are not going to be doing a lot of critical damage of any sort with their boarding, unless you are equipped for it. They're not going to do the additional troop damage with their brutal strikes, and they only have a 10% critical hit chance with the boarding as well. So you are relegated to playing similar to Tyranids with the troops. You want to kill off the troops themselves, slowly cripple them and whittle them down, and with the number of ships you have to field, you are pretty damn fearsome in that regard. For one of my fleet sets I used in preparation for this video, I utilized 6 smashes which have access to lance cannons and torpedoes. And if your boarding torpedoes ever hit, especially in combination with some skills that make your boarding more effective or even do hull damage to your opponent, they are almost as effective as regular damage torpedoes. So there's a really good versatility as well as the troop damage that you're getting from these if you build your fleet appropriately. Their frigates are also perhaps some of the best frigates in the game for the price allotted to them. However, you're not going to be using these as effective scouts. They don't have access to assault running like every other faction in the game does, but they have a lot of power. They are insanely resilient, especially against players that don't know how to deal with them. The Savage is perhaps the most dangerous of these frigates. For a lot of circumstances, if you have 2 or 3 of these facing off against a light cruiser that's trying to backdoor or steal objectives, your Savages have a very good chance of actually winning that engagement so long as you make full use of the front armor, or just at least tell your Savages to engage the light cruiser head on. Your opponent's going to have to put a lot more effort than they probably would like to at least get at the vulnerable side armor, which is the unique trait of the Orks specifically. For all the other frigates have consistent armor value on all 3 arcs. But with the 83 armor, that changes that dynamic a little bit into favor of the Orks in a lot of circumstances. And even Onslaught can be pretty fearsome, but it is more of a fire support type of ship with the sheer amount of guns it has access to. And with Lock On, it's going to be getting a lot of shots off, and with the speed that they go, similar to all the other Ork ships, they will be staying in formation really damn well. So you don't have to worry about them being flying off on their own and getting sniped by Eldari ships that are getting infuriated by your constant scanner pulses. Whereas the Brutes would be the hardest to take advantage of, for they have spurs on them, but when you consider they only have 200 health as opposed to the 400 of the other 3 frigates, you are going to get a lot more ramming value against cruisers and capital ships with the Savages and Onslaughts instead. And the reason this makes it a lot more difficult to utilize is because you're going to be using these to kill frigates with the spur damage. The 300% damage kind of warrants it, and it is satisfying when your brutes hit. They can almost one-shot every kind of frigate outside of anything that has maybe 83 armor like the Necrons and Space Marines, and in some situations frigates that have 400 health on them. They may still be standing, but just a single brute can murder them relatively quickly, while still having 83 armor to bear for its front armors, so you're going to survive any kind of ram you're going to be doing with this thing. Now Orks, the majority of the time want to get in the opponent's face. It goes without saying, although the ultimate trick you're going to have with that is all your opponents are not going to want to oblige you. Who would have thought, huh? With the sheer amount of mega cans and the point cost of all your ships, you can wreck them when you successfully get in close. However, your only means of speeding forward is the big red button, which is a cooldown type of booster. Kind of similar in effect to the all-head full of the Imperial Navy, you just don't have the control over it like you would with Imperial Navy or Adeptus Mechanicus. But it gives you roughly the same kind of speed boost. It is slightly slower when you consider the cooldown you're waiting for on these things, and it does have a bit of a random factor. But that by no means the Orks are not able or not capable to slow down their opponent and get in close. You got multiple different abilities and skills that are going to be amazing to help offset your low mobility, your slower speed, especially in circumstances like against Eldari or even the Chaos type of fleets. The Lances have an upgrade that allows them to constantly and at least consistently slow down an enemy capital ship, while your tractor cannon has potential to be ridiculously overpowered in some circumstances, for it can negate the Wraithbone shift of any of the Eldari ships, and it can even be used to a limited extent to move your own ships should you need them to dodge torpedoes or just to get a better advantageous position due to maybe missing with your ramming attempt or not having the best angle to hit with your torpedoes. It's like I said though, the strategy with the Orks is very simple. It's a lot of going on under the hood that's going to add to the complexity. For the lance cannons, even though I talked about them being a very effective means of slowing down your opponent, you do need to stagger the lance fire for multiple reasons. For one, the shields are going to recharge due to the ridiculous 16-second cooldown, the recharge time of said lances, and when you consider that the shields will automatically recharge after 10 seconds of not taking damage, you're not likely to do damage to the hull anytime soon if you don't stagger the lances effectively. And the other reason with the shocking sap upgrade, it slows down their speed by 50%, but the effect does not stack on top of itself, so you can't continue to slow it down further. But what you can do is with the staggering, you can prolong the 50% slow so long as you have additional saps to keep hitting the target with. You're not going to be able to indefinitely slow them for the entire cooldown, but you can get really damn close, and this is going to make a drastic difference for isolating ships and of course getting in close so you can murder and massacre your poor little victim. And in situations where you don't have saps, the main example being the Mega Cans, the Tractor Can easily alleviates that amazingly well. On top of other abilities that will either increase your speed, reduce the cooldown of your Big Red Button, lots of tools are at your disposal to help get in close or even just conceal your ships altogether if you are very crafty and able to misdirect and lead your opponent into a nice close range trap. They also have access to a good amount of fighters as well that are incredibly cheap in comparison to other factions. A lot of this is because they don't have actual bombers to utilize, but like with the Necron Doom Scythes, as I talked in my previous video going over Necrons, the fighter squadrons have the means to do hull damage to a ship over time, but they suffer from the same kind of rules that the Necron Doom Scythes do, in that they are so easily distracted. Never mind the fact they're also slower than the Doom Scythes, so it's going to be so much more easier for the other factions to just outrun them and just delay them actually doing damage to justify the skill. So a lot of these times you're going to be using them for the same reasons as you would any other fighter squadrons, to kind of distract point defense for torpedoes, or to use them to protect your ships as you are going to have difficult times avoiding guided shots like boarding torpedoes and secret missiles of Space Marines and Tau, respectively. That doesn't mean you can't avoid them outright. It is possible, if you angle your ships properly, to avoid the first round, the first wave of secret missiles, and then holding your ships in position to giving you time for your point defense and fighters to take them down. Although if they are complementing this with any fighters of sorts, then that may be an impossibility due to the Orks having less point defense. This is not a huge issue on its own because as your ships are so much more cheaper, just the sheer number of cruisers and capital ships you have access to will offset this penalty to your point defense. It just means that you're going to have to strictly tighten your formation if you want all your ships to make use of their point defense. For if they're spread out, then you are going to feel the pain of having less defenses for dealing with those missiles. And even if dodging those missiles may be an impossibility or a little bit too difficult to deal with, you still have your prow armor if you want to soak up the damage to the best of your abilities, either by using your rocks, which are immune to critical hits as a reminder, or just again the prow armor of your ships with the combination of them having additional health. They have the most health out of any other fleet in the game. So they are, not only are you going to have a ridiculous health pool for each individual ship, you're just going to have an outstanding amount of health for your entire fleet in general. So losing a single ship or two, if you can make good use of your brace for impact or just mitigate a lot of the torpedoes and missile damage coming your way will help tremendously in the close range fight once you get in close. Although, as I said already, your morale is going to be a problem, so you need to hang on to your rally and your encouraging speech, which in the case of Orks is called the Knob Bullies ability, for your morale. You almost exclusively will never want to use your emergency repairs unless you have fire assaults on you due to the fact that they're doing double damage and greatly increasing the said morale damage. Sure, you may lose an engine there, but if it's temporarily damaged and they're focusing it down, you are eventually going to get fire assaults too soon, eventually, at least shortly be able to repair that engine result as well anyway. Sure, you may suffer a temporary engine damage, but if the ship's getting focused down regardless, you are eventually going to get fire assaults, and that will warrant you to get full value out of your emergency repairs, which will also prompt you to fix your engines at the same time in a lot of circumstances. It is a game of attrition with the Orks. Once you get in close, you are going to dive into the meat grinder of your opponent. In a lot of circumstances, they cannot handle the close range abuse. You will just need to make sure you have some kind of frigates to help spot for the case of Eldari, so that way you can at least get your 9,000 range with the Mega Cans, which do benefit from the extended reach of the lock-on, even if the accuracy is going to be pitiful in comparison. So that 9,000 range, when you consider the Eldari almost exclusively have 9,000 range with almost all their weaponry, is going to be pretty significant to reveal them, even if you can't get in the melee range that you're wanting. As eventually some of those cans are going to hit, and they're going to start suffering from engine critical hits or anything that you're trying to prioritize. And if you're using torpedoes, that's where your saps can be useful, as well as the tractor cans. Just push them conveniently right into the torpedo wave that you have set for them. It's almost to the point that the tractor cans or the slow on the saps is almost a necessary upgrade for the Orks. And in a lot of circumstances, it is kind of true, due to the fact that as opponents get more familiar and are aware of the capability of your fleet, they are just going to straight up avoid you at all costs, especially when you're equipped with the Mega Cans. It is why I pointed out that they are perhaps one of the most powerful weapons in the game. They just don't have the convenience of piercing armor like a lot of the other weapons that are up in that same kind of tier. Now I'm going to talk about the two fleets I've been utilizing, one of which I really enjoy is the Sneaky Gits fleet that utilizes the Blood Axe sub-faction, which allows them to have the Shroud effect at the start of the battle. This fleet composes of 2 Hammer battle cruisers, a Terror cruiser, and 2 light cruiser Bashas, as well as 2 Rocks for point denial or just soaking damage, and 6 Savages for a lot of additional scouting and a little bit of additional firepower depending on the circumstance and the matchup. The Shroud effect is incredibly potent if utilized properly with this fleet, for all your ships are hidden, and with gas clouds and asteroid belts you can regain that stealth effect, since your opponent's going to be foolish to get in close with you due to your Mega Cans and firepower you have to bear as a result of that. So you can easily just fly into asteroid belts or gas clouds to reconceal yourself and just cause a little bit of uncertainty what your fleet is doing. And they will never see the Rocks coming at the same time due to the light cruiser Rocks' faster speed. They'll almost always get to the objective before anything else, so they're going to be caught off guard a lot of time until they're revealed by like a scanner pulse. And even then, if you can burn a couple of their torpedoes, any of their cooldown or any of their weapons have charges on them, you are setting yourself well for the rest of the battle. Mind you, the loss of a rock is still going to hurt your morale greatly, so you will need to be careful about losing outright. But even then, it has heavy guns to contribute, which makes it really damn fearsome even on the side objectives to deal with frigates or even light cruisers. And with the 360-degree boarding arc, it is sure to cripple any frigate that gets in close, especially if they have a low troop capacity as well. It may not be the most practical, since if any fleet that utilizes Mega Cans are probably going to want to either go all light cruisers or get as many battleships as possible, due to the fact that the battleships have access to 2 Mega Cans as opposed to 1. So it is going to be a little bit weaker. I just like it due to the concept of it, if truth be told. Realistically, with any Mega Can fleet, you probably want to go with the Evil Suns due to the fact they have access to a unique upgrade that allows their big rep button to give them more speed, as well as increased turning radius, as well as increased turning speed for all your ships, which can be essential, especially for the battleship, which is slower in general. And now for my second fleet there, which I just called looting your ships, is simply put 6 battlecruiser hammers that are equipped with torpedoes and lances, a single rock for a little bit of soak tanking ability as well as grabbing side objectives, and 4 savage gunships to serve for scouting and a little bit of extra power and being able to grab at other points there. Whereas the hammers themselves, the smasher variant, they are going to be relying on slowing down and crippling a ship to open up for possible torpedoes, and it allows you to be a lot more aggressive with your ramming. The important thing to keep in mind with mega cannons, if you want to get full value of them, is you don't want to get too ridiculous on your ramming, as a lot of times you will find yourself boosting through or bouncing off your ship and losing your means to fire with your proud mega cannon. Mind you, the heavy guns on the broadside are still really damn potent. They do not compare to a mega cannon, on top of the fact that you have weaker armor as well on the side. So you're not going to have as much fun with the ramming, which is what the boarding torpedo build of this fleet allows for. You can get so much more aggressive with the big red button to maximize your ramming damage. Fire off your torpedoes, and in a lot of circumstances this will help you give you time when you turn around to get your torpedoes off cooldown. It can be a lot more trickier to utilize with that said, since you're going to be controlling each of your ships individually to try and maximize your boarding potential or your torpedo damage. And with the Death Skull Sneaky Luda unique upgrade trait that allows all boarding damage to do additional hull damage to the enemy ship, it allows your boarding torpedoes to also contribute with killing off the ship effectively. Never mind the fact that all your lightning strikes and broadside boarding assault actions are also going to do a substantial amount of damage when you do this broadside type of ramming, or do these strafing runs of torpedoes and boarding. Just to give you a perfect example, if you do effectively get a boarding assault action in with the 8 troop damage, you're basically doing 160 points of additional hull damage on top of everything else you just did with that assault action alone. And it will help you do a good amount of burst damage in a single run, but you don't have much power to follow up. It is kind of a bursty type of fleet that relies you on being able to get multiple torpedo salvos off on a single ship, or at least a clump of ships that are together to maximize your value. It is nonetheless though a fun type of fleet that I've been enjoying, with the added utility and potential of your boarding being incredibly useful for killing off ships over time. Now I'm going to talk over some of the useful skills that you're going to need to look over. Plasma Bomb, if you're utilizing anything like tractor cannons or saps, this will be really damn effective for you. You're going to be constantly slowing them, constantly repositioning them. You can almost set up the perfect type of plasma bombs in a lot of circumstances, especially with the tractor cannon's ability to move a ship in 360 degrees any direction you wish. If you time it properly, you can get the full 400 damage, and this complements perfectly with the burst type damage I just talked about with the Death Skulls, if utilized effectively. The WOG skill can be a little bit tricky to utilize, or at least get actual results out of, since the Orks only have a 10% critical hit chance. Boosting it up to 20%, which is what this technically does, may seem a little bit underwhelming when you can compare it to Space Marines and Necrons and anything that have the high critical hit chance. But the Goth clan have access to another upgrade that allows you to augment your critical hit chance even further. So if you combine those two together, you have a 40% chance of doing critical hits with all your boarding actions, which makes this a lot more appealing when all is said and done. But it does require a very specific sub-faction if you really do want to crank out the critical hit chance. The Shock Attack Mega Cannon, this, I hinted at already with the boarding potential of the Death Skulls. This allows you to do 160 damage on a ship with the 4 assault actions it's doing, on top of killing off 8 troops with the ability itself. It does have a bit of a long cooldown, and it has the same kind of range as like a Mega Cannon for comparison's sake, so you're not going to get to use this in close. But it's a great way for softening up ships, weakening the crew, and priming them for later on if you are able to get vision of them ahead of time. You could start utilizing these and maybe even get a second shot depending on the circumstances of the battle. The tractor cannon, I talked about this enough already. This is almost the essential skill that you need for orcs, especially in a lot of the high mobility type of factions like the Tau fleet, the Chaos faction, and all the Eldari. Mind you, the only one that can actually evade the tractor cannon effectively would be Necrons with their inertialist drive, since it's an immediate blink, as opposed to the gradual movement speed of all the other factions I've hinted at. This is an insane ability, one that you will get a very good use out of, especially if you're open-minded about using it on even your friendly ships in some circumstances. However, if you try and use this with the blood axes, or even just in general, do note that all three of these weapon skills have add additional cannons, which includes the Nova Cannon. All will have a visual glitch on them, and at least at the time of this recording, that shows where the flagship is at all times. And this will kill the surprise factor of the blood axes if you were going with the commando skill to get the shroud effect. And now for the upgrades themselves. They're a good handful to look at, especially since all these sub-factions have access to their own type of upgrades, which can be used in different circumstances. The Shocking Sap upgrade, if by chance you are not satisfied with your tractor cannon getting you in close and personal with your opponent, then you got access to this for any ship that has sap cannons on it. Do note, I said already that you cannot stack this all if you fire all your saps all at once. Never mind the fact that shield's regeneration will just encourage you to stagger it. To get the most out of this upgrade, you do want to do that. With perfect example with my Death Skull, my Torpedo and Sap fleet, if you can chain the sap cannons perfectly, you are getting a 12-second slow for a weapon that has a 16-second cooldown. It is insane if utilized properly, and it does not discriminate whether you're hitting the shield or not. That's another important factor to keep in mind. The Wog Song, this is an essential upgrade to have access to for almost every single orc fleet, due to morale being your biggest crutch in all engagements. As soon as you lose a ship of any kind, you're losing almost half your morale just on that alone, and if the flagship's ever destroyed, you almost could instantly have a mutiny on every single one of your ships. Using this will give you that immunity for 30 seconds, and potentially you can even save this for the last second with your flagship if you know it's going to get destroyed, and just make your entire fleet immune to the loss of the flagship if you time this WOG properly. It's also a lot of the reason why you want to hang on to not using your emergency repairs as soon as you lose an engine, for morale is going to be a lot more of a bigger concern a lot of the time. Super saps, I see this a lot for a lot of orcs that rely on their saps, and in truth, this will only be practical, I feel, for Eldari factions, those that are utilizing the hull fields at least. That would be the Corsairs and the Eshuriani. To bypass the hull field, which have an 80% resistance or 80% chance to just ignore your sap damage, is going to be important if you're relying on it to help slow down those ships to getting close. But otherwise, I don't feel like it's as necessary for all the other factions unless you want to get really early critical hit damage with your saps by ignoring the shields of all the other factions. Commando training, this is a unique upgrade exclusive to the Blood Axes, and I am really biased towards this, but it is a very tricky type of upgrade to get full value out of. For even though you're close range dependent, if you have saps, if you have lots of guns, just the regular light damage type of guns, they all have really long range on them, and more often than not, if you're not holding fire for your ships, you're just giving away your position as a result of that. So it can easily be misused, but it has so much utility in a lot of circumstances that can make this an amazing upgrade over time. Sneaky Looters, I talked about this for my Death Skull Torpedo fleet, and this essentially allows your boarding to do damage for you. It turns your fleet into a very bursty type of orc fleet to do a lot of damage rapidly, especially if you are very effective at getting torpedo hits in. However, be very mindful of Cold Arms ability, for that will greatly mitigate, almost exclusively just cut the troop damage in half. So if you fixate too much on a single ship, you could suffer diminishing damage just because of that. And a single ship doing Cold Arms isn't really all that beneficial to you unless you can force multiple ships to use their Cold Arm ability. That would be the exception. Otherwise, This will allow you to do additional damage on top of course crippling them once their troop complements start going down. It makes your boarding essentially an additional weapon for you, and there is nothing wrong about more bursty damage. Now to Evil Sons, this is the most popular upgrade of all the Orc fleets just because speed or slowing down your opponent is such a factor to win with Orcs. In this case, your big red button just makes you go faster, and you have a better turning speed, so that way your opponent cannot try and punish the fact that you have really weak armor on the rear and on top of having slower turning speed. This allows you to mitigate that really well, especially with cruisers and light cruisers, and it's almost essential for the battleship just because they are not going to be turning around anytime soon without this upgrade. The Goth Art Boys, this is for the Goth sub-faction, and while I don't think this is as practical as all the other factions upgrades I showed, it is the essential piece you need to get value out of the WOG skill that I talked about earlier. It gives you that additional 10% critical hit chance on all your boarding, and when you combo that with the WOG cry, it boosts up to 40%. Making it really damn respectable and really damn fearsome for your boarding to eventually cripple opponents. It is not the most practical, as I said, especially with the additional troop that you get for every state, since it's only a single additional troop, which is not going to make or break any of your matchups that you're going to have, alas. And that was my rundown of the Orc fleet. I have had a lot of fun with them. They are really simplistic at a glance, but there's a lot under the hood you need to keep in mind, especially as time goes on. There's a lot of nuances with rocks dodging bombs, your tractor can allowing you to protect your ships in certain circumstances if utilized properly, and just the requirement to actually have a good understand what your opponent's capable of. If you're going to go with things like your mega cans or torpedoes, you need to see you need to be aware of what your opponent could do ahead of time, so you can take those evasive actions as necessary. Since it can be really easy to see the Orcs as a very straightforward and one-note type of faction, but as you understand all the nuances, it can open up a world for you. That doesn't mean that Orcs are easy, mind you, but they can stomp all over any unsuspecting opponent that you may come up against really damn easily. I thank you all for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you on the battlefield.